All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. We're so glad that you've accepted this invitation to join Decolonization Learning Journey. My name is Nicole Cameron, and I'm a straight, cisgender white woman, and I live, work, and play in Unama'ki, the land of fog, or as you may commonly know it, Cape Breton Island. I'm the Associate Executive Director at the Community Sector Council of Nova Scotia, and I'm so pleased to welcome each of you to this vital conversation and this initiative. Today we have over 500, actually no, the number keeps climbing, over 607 registrants. And registrants are coming from Ontario, from Quebec, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, Newfoundland, Labrador, and of course the majority of participants are from here, right here in Nova Scotia. We have people from all levels of colonial government with us, numerous Indigenous organizations. We have philanthropic foundations, private sector businesses, social enterprises, and the majority of registrants are from nonprofit and voluntary organizations. This initiative, the Decolonization Learning Journey, is made possible through an incredible partnership that was recently created with Unama'ki College at Cape Breton University, and also through the funding support from the province of Nova Scotia's Departments of Communities, Culture and Heritage, as well as Labor and Advanced Education. And I'll share a little bit more about this initiative in a little while. But before we get started, I do want to just share a couple of housekeeping notes for our time together. Due to the number of people on this call, everyone has joined in listen-only mode, meaning you're not able to contribute your voice, but you can contribute your questions using the control panel. There's a section likely to the right of the screen. It may be at the bottom of your screen. So we do invite you to post your questions in that space. Please know too that this session is being recorded. So if you have to leave early or if a colleague is interested, we will be sending out the recording in a couple of days' time, and it will be posted on our website. Lastly, in that control panel I just mentioned, there is a chat feature. You're certainly more than welcome to use it, but we do ask that you post questions in the question space. And it's easy to get caught up in the chat if some dialogue is going on. But we ask that you really try to stay as present as you can to the speaker as we go along in our journey today. So I'd like to get started and call on my co-hosts, part of our hosting team, Mary Beth Doucette and Elder Jay Meader, to open up the Decolonization Learning Journey. Mary Beth?
Okay. So thanks, Nicole. And just to start off in a good way, we want to acknowledge that most of us are currently residing here in Mi'kma'ki, though, as Nicole said, some of you are joining from other territories that are not part of Mi'kma'ki and that are calling in from Mohawk territory or Algonquin or Inuit territory. And so we're really happy to have you join us. And with that in mind, I'd like to virtually welcome you to the magic of the internet, to Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which the Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqiyik Maliseet people first signed with the British Crown in 1726. The treaties did not deal with surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqiyik title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. And so following the traditions of Mi'kma'ki, I will now invite Elder Jay Meader to offer words that welcome us in a good way.
Thank you. My English name is Jane Meader. My traditional name is First Dawn Woman. I have the spirit of the gray horse and a white buffalo warrior. And I belong to the Turtle Clan, the Mi'kmaq people of Unama'ki. And I really want to, first of all, thank you from the bottom of my heart and send greetings from my heart to you and from my heart to yours. And I'm so grateful to be part of this. I am deeply honored to be part of this decolonization and healing journey for all of us. And I would like to begin with an opening prayer in my language. Tisok Kiniska Kugamijina. Negad muy walulek, uchidulana agwek. Edamolek, abuhamuinen. Gezalu godemek, onumimtimoda. Skwewiek, amenahach, iganamuyek, amsid, galokun, kamulamunina. Akalokun, dandeli dasotiek. Akalokun, wahamein, ntijahamich. Amenaha, exaltutinen, kespem lugademek, ulalugahan. Nad liach, laliak.
Oh, laliak. Everybody's frozen.
I know.
Just taking a moment. Bulalanging.
Mary Beth. Oh, okay. I thought you were stuck in a stuck mode.
Thank you so much, Jane and Mary Beth, for opening our decolonization learning journey. It's really such a privilege to have both of you on the journey with us. And as host organization, we're just really delighted and honored to have you as part of the hosting team. I'd like to share just over the next couple of minutes a little bit about Mary Beth and a little bit about Jane, and then a little bit about the initiative itself. And then Mary Beth and Jane will talk a little bit more from their perspective about what this journey means to them. And then, of course, we'll introduce Stephen Augustine, who is here today to share the creation story. So Mary Beth Doucette is an assistant professor and Purdy Crawford Chair in Cape Breton University Shannon School of Business in Sydney, Nova Scotia. He is also a Member 2 band member and a doctoral student in management at St. Mary's University in Halifax. She holds a Bachelor of Engineering from Dalhousie University and an MBA in Community Economic Development from Cape Breton University. With a focus on interactions between Mi'kmaq and Canadians, Mary Beth researches how people in organizations use policies and procedures to share knowledge in culturally informed ways. Her current research focuses on ways in which reconciliation and decolonization are practiced in organizations. Mary Beth has become a trusted and admired colleague and friend over the years, and I'm just delighted to have you on this journey, Mary Beth. Elder Jane Meader also joins us as co-host to this decolonization learning journey. Jane was raised in the Mi'kmaq community of Member 2, which is adjacent to the city of Sydney in Unama'ki, Cape Breton in Nova Scotia. Mi'kmaq is her first language, and she deeply holds and daily lives the traditional teachings and values that she has learned from elders throughout the course of her life, beginning in her early childhood. Today, she provides and participates in traditional ceremonies and gatherings at home and across North America. Jane has extensive, diverse experience in the professional education arena and is a developer, writer, and implementer for Mi'kmaq cultural activities and events for many schools throughout Nova Scotia. Jane obtained a certificate in early childhood education from the Frobel Center for Early Childhood Education. She has a certificate in Northern and Native Education from McGill University, a Bachelor of Arts in Community Studies from Cape Breton University, and a Bachelor of Education from St. FX University here in Nova Scotia, as well as a Master's of Education from St. FX. Today, Jane teaches courses for St. FX University, and she is no stranger to this online platform as she delivers some of her courses in this virtual world. And she also teaches for Cape Breton University while continuing to be a key educator in her home community of Member 2. She is the Mi'kmaq language coordinator for the Member 2 Band Council, and she's also on the Mi'kmaq Language Advisory Committee for, I apologize in advance if I might get this wrong, Mi'kmaq Kinamat Nui. In addition, she acts as an advisor to the Nova Scotia Department of Education in Mi'kmaq Studies and Treaty Education. She is a drummer and traditional singer. She is an artist, a craftsperson, and makes traditional Mi'kmaq clothing. Welcome, Jane, and again, thank you so much for being part of the hosting team. So now that you all know myself, Mary Beth, and Jane a little bit, I just wanted to share just a couple minutes, some background as to why the Community Sector Council is involved in this work. And then we'll move on to hearing from Jane and Mary Beth, and of course to Stephen. So in response to the final report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada and the 94 calls to action, the Community Sector Council embarked on an organizational learning journey beginning back in the fall of 2018. Mary Beth and Jane were both a part of that journey, and it's hard to believe it's almost 2 years since we began this together with you. At the completion of that program and through various initiatives since, the Community Sector Council continues with its commitment and responsive action of reconciliation through Indigenous education. Our goals for this program are to continue to increase individual and organizational understanding and knowledge of colonial history and current realities of Indigenous people, and to engage in discussion on how to incorporate reconciliation learning into our work and everyday life. We believe that by helping to build a critical mass of citizens and change makers through education, through dialogue and right relations with Indigenous communities, that there can be genuine shifts in the way we work in organizations, on our boards, and in our communities, so that we collectively create a step closer towards reconciliation. In partnership with Unama'ki College at Cape Breton University, we're hosting this 4-part learning journey beginning today, and it will run into the fall and into the winter of 2020 and 2021. The program is designed so that we have 4 different series. Each series comprises of 4 sessions for a total of 18 sessions in this program. If this is, in the interest of time, sorry, I won't go into the specifics of all of the different programming that's coming up, but you can find that on our website. I do want to provide just a short introduction and overview as to the approach that we've co-designed with Unama'ki College, and that is a 4-fold approach. So the first piece is really listen and unsettle, so we get comfortable with being uncomfortable. The second piece is to unlearn and relearn our shared history. The third is to reflect, and often this is the piece that we miss. We listen to learn, we learn, and then we act. But we're really inviting a conscious reflection process throughout this learning journey. And then finally, to act in wise and informed ways. So we encourage you and staff, board of directors to participate in all of the sessions, to build your own knowledge and understanding as we individually build our own strong resolve, wise action to respond to the TRC and to help build just, respectful, thriving, and equitable communities across Nova Scotia and beyond. So I'd like to call on Mary Beth and Elder Jane Meter to also provide their thoughts and their perspective on this initiative and, of course, the larger call to Canadians. But Mary Beth, why don't I pass it to you?
Sure. Yeah, so as Nicole mentioned, I have been doing some different things in different contexts, different organizations for a little while. Nicole and I have actually worked together on board committees and different training sessions over the years, and a couple of years ago, I guess it was almost 2 years ago now, when she called me to invite me to participate in the CSC's decolonization learning journey, which they had titled themselves. They were just inviting me to join them on that journey. I couldn't help but say yes, because interacting in this space, there's lots of complicated terms. You might hear indigenization, you might hear reconciliation, and we also talk about decolonization, but very few organizations that I've come across yet are brave enough to start engaging with that level of dialogue. And so what it signals to me is, like the CSC is really committed to asking hard questions, to doing the work, and to making sure that what they're doing is more critical of the system, of different models, and so far we've been doing a couple of different things in the last couple of years since she invited me to that discussion. It's been a learning experience for me, and I look forward to continuing to work with them. And so just for a little bit more thinking around what you'll be hearing today, Nicole and I chatted yesterday, and she and I decided it was important, especially on this first of many webinars that are going to be offered. It was important to just highlight, I guess, that this is, like, it's an uncomfortable conversation for lots of people. It requires a different level of openness than what we might be used to engaging with in our conversations. And we really want you to feel like you can ask some uncomfortable questions and to engage in some of these complicated dialogues. And so Nicole and I, we don't claim to be experts, but like I said, we've been doing some of this engagement work for a while now. And so we want to, in some ways, model what this might look like, what some of the questions look like, and also give a chance for people to hear from the lovely people that we get a chance to learn from on a regular basis, like Stephen and Jane. And so I'm looking forward to journeying with you in the next couple of weeks and months as we continue this conversation. And I'll cut myself off there and pass it on to Jane to just add any additional opening thoughts.
First of all, I'm very grateful to be on this healing journey, because it is a journey of healing for all of us. But also that decolonization is a very important part in the work that I do. And when we talk about decolonization, a lot of times we're talking about decolonizing our minds, but we also need to decolonize our hearts and our spirits along with our thinking. We need to bring the decolonization paradigm from the mind to the heart and spirit, where if we do that, then we can, we're able to touch each other and to touch each other's hearts and spirits, and able to, I guess, maybe influence better. If we do it with, I think it's important that we do this decolonization with understanding, with love, always with caring, not blaming, but yes, stating facts, but also do it with love and with compassion. The other thing is, as for reconciliation, I am a real believer of reconciliation. But I think the thing about reconciliation is, as I was growing up, and when we talked about reconciliation in our culture and in our worldview, reconciliation always began with an apology, which Canada has done. And then there's two things that come before reconciliation. And the two things are forgiveness and restitution. And I think we need to work on those two things to be able to forgive. But in forgiving, it means that it's not to say, okay, I forgive you and that's it, and walk away. Because restitution is a really important part of reconciliation. And in our culture, there has to be some kind of restitution. Doesn't mean you throw a bunch of money at it. It just means that you're willing to right the wrongs or to change things. And to me, this truth and reconciliation is teaching all Canadians the truth of the history, that shared history. And it's not Indigenous history, it's Canada's history. And I think that's something we need to remember. It is Canada's history, and we need to honor that, and we need to teach everybody that. And I think that's part of restitution, is that everybody knows what happened, why we're in the situations we're in today. And I think once we teach the truth, and we teach it to all people and to all students, both young and old, then we're on our way to reconciliation. And in reconciliation and finding allies, it means nobody is ahead of anybody. What we're doing is walking hand in hand, walking together toward a good future for all our children, every child that is coming. And as our people say, for the next 7 generations, that we walk together always in love, compassion, and understanding. And that's why I'm on this journey. Thank you.
Bilal and Jane. Bilal. So yeah, so everyone, as you listen and participate in the conversation today, we invite you to think about Jane's words, to think about what's brought you to this conversation today, whether it be work or personal interest, curiosity, or some desire to better understand what Canadian reconciliation might mean. We invite you to reflect on the teachings that Stephen is going to share, and to think about how this traditional Mi'kmaq history influences you in your work, and to think about the ways in which local stories of places and spaces influence what you do at work. And so now I have the great pleasure of introducing Stephen Augustine, who is going to share the creation story today with us. It's a story I've heard from Stephen many times, and every time I hear it, I hear slightly different things. And you never really know what is going to come to mind when Stephen starts telling stories. So it doesn't change, but I take different lessons from it. So Stephen Augustine is the Associate Vice President, Indigenous Affairs at Unama'ki College at Cape Breton University. Stephen Augustine is a hereditary chief on the Mi'kmaq Grand Council, and he's the Associate Vice President of Indigenous Affairs at Unama'ki College. He was the curator of ethnology for the Eastern Maritimes in the Ethnology Services Division of the Canadian Museum of Civilization in Gatineau, Ottawa. He holds a master's in Canadian Studies from Carleton University and a BA in Anthropology and Political Science from St. Thomas University. Stephen has shared his expertise in research and traditional knowledge with many organizations, including government departments, the Assembly of First Nations, and various Aboriginal communities across Canada. He has been an elder advisor to the Federal Court of Canadian Judges, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and the Human Rights Commission of Canada. In his role as hereditary chief of the Mi'kmaq Grand Council and by elders training since an early age, he has a thorough command of traditional practices, his language, and the history of his people. Bilal and Stephen for joining us and joining us today.
Bilal, Mary Beth, Kuchitan Deli Wigumio Nigeola Giskuk, Miwadam, Tan Del Desit Nimajuinu, Gedugina Masit Tan Detai, Kinu, Nenamug, Nenamug make Iskuk, Bilal.
So I just, one housekeeping note. I think as Stephen's talking, we're going to disappear from your screen. So you'll just have Stephen front and center, and then we'll be in the background watching like the rest of you.
Okay, I would like to start by acknowledging my ancestors who have taught me everything most of everything that I know from a Mi'kmaq context. I want to begin with my great grandfather, Simon Joe Simon from Elsipogtog, and his wife, Isabel Augustine. She was my great grandmother on my mother's side. So her son, Johnny Simon, when I was very young, like 4 or 5 years old, he took me on journeys with him out on the Rishabaktu River, and we lived from end of April into May, and all the way into September, October, out into the harbors of Rishabaktu, up along the Kujibukwak, up as far as Point Sapin, and we sometimes went across to Prince Edward Island, where my grandmother was from, on my father's side, Agnes Augustine. She lived to be 100 years old. My great-grandparents both lived, one of them lived to be 96, and the other one, I believe it was 102. They couldn't find his birth certificate, so they were just guessing his age. And most of the influences I had were from Johnny Simon and Agnes Thomas from Lennox Island. And I grew up with them as a young child up until I was 9 years old. My parents moved to Germany. My dad was in the military. He was in the Second World War. He was in the Black Watch, and we lived in Germany for 4 years. And then we came back, and they settled in Camp Gagetown at Oromocto in New Brunswick, near Fredericton. But I ended up moving back home with my grandfather and my grandmother, Annie Thibodeau. She was an Acadian woman that was brought, she was born in our reserve. Her mother was brought to our community as a young 12, 13-year-old that gave birth to a child that she left with elderly people on the reserve. Anyway, so a lot of my education, my early education, early childhood education was done in our Mi'kmaq language. And it was done on the land, on the water, on the rivers, naming everything, the animals, the birds, plants, and fish. And slowly I was being introduced to my culture and traditions. As I was growing older, I was being explained the Mi'kmaq creation story, which at some point in time when I was like 7, 8, 9 years old, just before we went off to Germany, the story kind of scared me. I don't know who this Glooskap character was. I mean, he seemed to be strong. He seemed to be good at sometimes, and sometimes he was bad. I mean, not bad in a negative sense of killing people, but bad in a way of playing tricks on his people to teach them lessons. And so we moved to Germany. I went to school. When we came back, I continued my education with my grandfather. So I went to live with them in Big Cove, and today it's called Elsipogtog. And we continued to follow the places where we used to go, up the Rishabaktu River, down the Rishabaktu River to the mouth of the river, up the Alduin River to St. Louis de Kent, and up the Kushibukak River, and across the ways down the coast to Cape Rishabaktu Cape, and across to Prince Edward Island and back. I mean, it was a 14-mile rowing, which would take maybe about 7 to 10 hours, depending on the wind and the waves. And so we would spend several days in Prince Edward Island and come back, and we would come back to our camp, which was built along the shoreline, built out of driftwood, seaweed, sand, rocks. I mean, we never built a fire inside our shelter. It was always outside where we cooked our food and so on. But my grandfather would warm the rocks and bring them in and cover them with sand and then put a seaweed on top and a tarpaulin, and we would lay on that and sleep. And sometimes it was so warm we didn't need any blankets. So we lived out along the Rishabakto Harbor, and he kept continuing telling me the stories of Mi'kmaq creation. And I didn't know really the significance of all of that. And it didn't make any sense until after I grew up. I got married, and I was working in Big Cove. I was a probation officer. I was a welfare officer. I was a parole officer. So I kind of drifted around doing correctional work up until age 27. My father was killed in a car pedestrian accident. A drunk driver killed him, and it kind of changed my perspective in life, because he asked me, he wanted me to go to university and get a law degree, become a lawyer. And I somehow didn't follow up with that until after he died. I wanted to continue to learn, so I went back to university and started studying. And I took psychology, philosophy, political science, sociology, but somehow these things didn't really make sense to me. And then I started getting interested into history, political science, because of the way the Indigenous people and the band governments and chiefs were kind of evolving in the early 60s into a new reality. And so I wanted to know what's going on. Who are Mi'kmaq people anyway? What are we? And some of the things that my grandfather had spoken to me about was mentioned in university coursework. In history, we would be lucky to get 15 minutes on the subject of Mi'kmaq people in a 30-hour or 60-hour course. So it was kind of a very baseline material that we would hear about ourselves in the classes. And there were maybe 2 or 3, maybe 4 of us in the whole university at St. Thomas University. And a lot of us were Mi'kmaq, and there were another handful of Maliseet people, Wolastoqiyik people from Nigutkuk, Tobik, Woodstock, and St. Mary's and Kingsclear. And we somehow kind of got together and wanted to know more about ourselves and our culture and our own histories. And we kind of ended up putting together a department, Native Studies department, but there were about 4 or 5 courses in there. And we were lucky to get maybe 15, 20 minutes of Mi'kmaq, Wolastoqiyik cultural material into those courses. Anyway, so my focus, my attention started turning into studying Mi'kmaq, and I started doing my own research in no matter what class I was in. I was at the archives digging out old stuff about Mi'kmaq people, reading Journal of the American Folklore, and all these other things that were not on my reading list. So I did a lot of extra reading on the side to learn more about Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqiyik cultures. And it kind of extended to Abenaki, and then Innu, Cree, Montagnais, and Ojibwe, and Algonquin. So my knowledge system started to expand. And so I started focusing back to the stories that I kept hearing when I was younger. And the Mi'kmaq creation story, I never could find it anywhere. It was never written down as a whole story, an embodiment of one. And finally, I came across Silas Rand's book, which was published in the 1888. I think it was published posthumously. He died in 1889, something like that, in Nova Scotia. And somebody else published his material, and it was Legends of the Mi'kmaq. And I saw bits and pieces of the Mi'kmaq creation story spread out all over the place with these stories that Silas Rand collected in Nova Scotia, in New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island from about the 1830s, 40s, right up into close to the time of his death. And so it would seem that everybody in Mi'kma'ki had a piece of the Mi'kmaq creation story, but nobody had brought it all together until I decided, once I heard it from my great-grandfather and great-grandmother and my grandfather, and Agnes Thomas as well, shared in the story, because she heard it from my grandfather, her husband, Basil Tom Augustine, whose father was Tom Augustine, and Tom Augustine happened to be the father of my great-great-grandfather on my mother's side, Noel Tom Augustine, whose daughter was Isabel, and Isabel's son was Johnny Simon, and my mother, Rita Simon, married my dad. So they were third cousins or something like that. But somehow there was a loop, and all that extension back. Tom Augustine's father was Noel Augustine. Noel's father was Peter, and Peter's father was Michael. And Michael was the one that signed the Treaty of Peace and Friendship in Halifax in 1760. So anyway, stories, songs, sacred pipe bags, sacred pipes, like this one, was passed down to me. Eagle feathers, Gesundheit, God bless. So a lot of the material, cultural, ceremonial material were passed down to me from the Augustines that signed the treaty. I mean, Michael Augustine, he was his name was Guimo, Guimo, before he was baptized on August 28th, the feast of St. Augustine. In 1747, he was baptized in Shubenacadie, Nova Scotia. And so he was given the name Augustine. He was given the name Michael in the 1820s when he signed the Treaty of Peace and Friendship at Annapolis Royal in 1726. He was like 19 years old, 20 years old. He went there with his father. But his father was the main signatory to that treaty, but he also signed an X on that treaty to signify that he witnessed what was going on. Anyway, so All Guimo clan, Guimo comes from the word for loon. We are of the Loon clan. So the creation story, getting back to that, it was handed down to me from that side of the family. And because Michael Augustine signed the treaty, the various descendants on the male side, depending on which side of the family, took on the role as hereditary chief. And a lot of times they were called captains, and they were not really elected chiefs. It was a role that was passed down from generation to generation. We didn't get into the democratic elective system until after the Indian Act. And some of the communities and some of the First Nations communities in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick elected their own chiefs in their own communities, starting in the 1830s sometimes and in 40s, until the Indian Act system also kicked in. And so the democratic system was trying to be pushed on us under the colonization system, the colonial governments of Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island. So there are 7 levels in the creation story. And the first level is Gizulk, giver of life. You have been created. Like the terminology kind of signifies a past tense, a present tense, and the future tense. That creation is happening as I speak, and when I wake up 10 years from now, I'll be 80 years old. I'll still be being created. As long as I wake up and see the world around me, creation is happening for me. So giver of life, Gizulk, is number one. Number two is grandfather's son, Niskamij. We call our grandfathers Niskamij because we come down from them. Our blood, our ancestry, our descendancy comes from our father and their parents, or our mother and their father, our father and their father. So grandfather. So we inherit a lot of their physical characteristics and so on and so forth. So when the sun shines on us during the day, we see our shadow. And when we see our shadow, we call it Antija Amij. Antija Amij is, in Mi'kmaq, actually means spirit. It represents your soul. So one gives life, Gizul gives you life. Grandfather, son puts spirit into your soul by allowing you to see your shadow. And you're inheriting the blood and the lungs. You're breathing the air and you're breathing the blood of your ancestors. And we're connected also to the earth, Mother Earth. We call Usit Kamu, Weskid Kaamin. It's like a surface of something, and you stand upon it, and you're Weskid Kaamin. And when you become a human being, you peel yourself off the surface of Mother Earth with all the elements of herself, the earth, the leaves, the plants, and everything else, soil, sand. It's part of us as we arise and are given our lives. So we become Weskijinu. But the term Akijinu, it means our mother collectively. Our mother in Mi'kmaq, Akijinu. So Wuskijinu is people of Mother Earth, Usitkamu. So Usitkamu, that's our source of creation, part of our creation, but it sustains us as well. Mother Earth sustains our bodies. Through the birds, plants, animals, and fish, we are able to obtain our food, our clothing, our medicines, our shelter, our tools of survival. Notice I didn't say weapons. I said tools of survival. How we travel about on the surface of Mother Earth, whether it's on the soil, on the ground, on the water, on the ice, and on the snow, with our toboggans and our snowshoes. I always have a hard time saying that, snowshoes. Anyway, so our modes of travel and our ability to perform our ceremonies, which is our way of negotiating for our survival. We drum, we sing, we dance, we burn tobacco, and we offer the smoke from the burning tobacco. We burn sweet grass on one end, and we offer the smoke. We burn sage, and the smoke that comes from there is representing all our collective words. But the ceremony keeper, the spirit keeper, usually does all the praying for all of us, and will pass the smoke with an eagle feather from the tobacco, from the sweetgrass, from the sage, or from the sacred pipe. We smoke it and we blow the smoke upwards and towards the 7 sacred directions. So those are the first 3 levels of creation. And one day on the surface of Mother Earth, a bolt of lightning hit in the springtime when the spirit of the thunder arrives in the clouds, and rain and then thunderbolts. And a thunderbolt hit a certain portion of Mother Earth, and it caused the shape of a human being, like with its legs pointed in the direction of the setting sun its head was in the direction of the rising sun, and its arms were outstretched, one to the north and one to the south. And so for us, I mean, this is the first sacred directions of north, south, east, and west. And it is done with the shape of a human being on the surface of Mother Earth. But he didn't get his shape until a second bolt of lightning hit the earth in the same spot where this shape was sitting on Mother Earth, laying, I mean. And it was given fingers and toes and 7 sacred parts to his head, 2 ears to listen from his heart, 2 eyes to look from the goodness of his heart, 2 holes in his nose to smell, to sense his world, and a mouth to take in the sacred breath of life, to be able to take in water, and to be able to take in food and medicine. And our elders used to say, food is medicine and medicine is food. There was no difference in our culture between the two. But most of the medicines usually come from plants, but they also come from internal organs of fish and animals and birds. So, Glooskap was given his shape, and our elders are always teaching us lessons while they're telling these kind of stories. And they would say, you know, Glooskap was still stuck on the back of Mother Earth. He couldn't move. He was still stuck. Just in the same way that babies were put in cradle board. They were still stuck on their mother, because the mother would wear the cradle board on the back. But the reason for that is they could hear the heartbeat of their mother. And one of the important survival mechanisms for children at the very early age is to recognize the heartbeat of their mother. As long as that heartbeat is heard, that child will not cry, even if it's hungry or wet. As long as it hears its mother's heartbeat, it's happy. The other thing is the eyes. Our elders teach us that even children, 2 or 3 years old, if they're playing down by the riverside, by the water, and they see a bunch of canoes coming to them, they will, if they don't recognize those people, they will run away, run back to an older brother or parents or father or grandfather or an adult, and start pointing towards the river to indicate there's somebody that they don't recognize. And it's always like an early warning signal. If they don't recognize, run away. The sense of the nose as well. Children will learn the smell of their wigwam, their clothing, the skins of animals that they wear. So they can smell their family, because other families would prefer wearing beaver pelts rather than a fox pelt or something else. So the child begins to learn the different smells of different peoples in their community, but they also, if they don't recognize the smell of somebody, a stranger, they'll certainly run away and warn others. So it was a survival mechanism. And the mouth, it's for taking water and food, and words come out, and our elders will teach us. If you use your ears and your eyes and your nose and your mouth from the goodness of your heart, you will be accepted by others in the same way that you do accept and treat others with dignity and respect and honor. And so it is important for us to also share our food in the same way our elders will tell us. Children will always take food out of their mouth and offer it to you, because that's what they saw their mother masticating meat or something, taking it out of her mouth and putting it into the mouth of a child. And so the children kind of emulate this idea of loving their mother and sharing their food. And so that's the common reality among Indigenous Mi'kmaq culture, is the idea of sharing and caring. And it wasn't until the third bolt of lightning that hit the earth that caused the freedom of Glooskap, Geluluskap, the first one who spoke. And he stood up and rose, and he thanked Giver of Life for giving him his life. He thanked Grandfather Sun for giving him his spirit and his shadow. And he thanked Mother Earth for allowing part of herself for his creation. And when he peeled himself off Mother Earth, he was given the reality of a Weskijinu, Uskijinu. And that's where the term comes from, Uskijinu, and Inu, Ulnu, Inuit, Ulnapi, Skijin, the Wolastoqiyik people, the Maliseet, the way they say Indigenous, they'll say Skijin, and Ulnu, and Inu, Montagnier people call themselves Inu. They're using the terminology. We are the people of the land. We belong to Mother Earth. We are from her. We come from her. So that is a real important lesson that to be taken from the Mi'kmaq creation story, Indigenous Mi'kmaq creation story. The story is quite long. It took originally 7 days to tell, and I only had 35-40 minutes to tell this creation story. But Glooskap got up and explored his territory, going out west until British Columbia. Today it's called British Columbia, until he arrived to some land across mountains and some water. And then he went south to land that was red in color and narrowing, and then up north to the land of ice and snow. So the directions, the color of the directions, when he decided to go back to the east when he saw his grandfather's sun coming up in the east, which was yellow. It hadn't come up yet, and back towards where the sun sets, it was still black night. So the east represents the color yellow, and the west black, and the south represents the color red. If you go down to Arizona, New Mexico, down around that area, the soil is red. And if you go to the north, the land is full of ice and snow, so it's white. And anyway, he goes back to the east where he was given his creation, and he's just wondering what's going on in his life. And he looks up into the sky and sees an eagle flying around in a circle around the sun. And slowly it descends and lands in front of him. And the eagle says, I am Gitpu. I am the eagle. I've been chosen to bring messages to you, to speak to you on behalf of Giver of Life, Grandfather, Sun, and Mother Earth. And I've come here to tell you that you're going to be joined by your family really soon. And you will be able to understand your place in this world. And the eagle went flying back up into the sky, and a feather fell. And Glooskap grabbed the feather and held on to it ever since. The eagle feather represents our relationship with the Great Spirit, the Giver of Life, Grandfather, Sun, and Mother Earth. And the eagle feather is always respected. And if you give a person an eagle feather, it's always given on the fact that that person is selfless and will do things for others, not for themselves, not for their own gain, but for the gain of the collective. So eagles and eagle feathers are very important elements in our culture and traditions. So when he turned around, he saw an old woman sitting on a rock, and he went up to her and asked her who she was. And she had all this white silvery hair and glistening. And she said her name was Nugami, or grandmother, and that she was given a life of an old woman, already wise and knowledgeable, and she owed her creation from a rock or a stone in the ground that she was sitting on. And early in the morning, dew formed on this rock, and she was given this creation of an old woman, already wise and knowledgeable. And so she said to Glooskap, if you respect my wisdom and knowledge, I will help you understand your place in this world. And so Glooskap was happy his grandmother came into creation. He called upon a little animal scurrying along. And he says, Abistanuj, he said, this is Martin, come here, I have a favor to ask of you. And he took some tobacco and he gave it to Abistanuj. And he says, can you give us your life? Grandmother and I need to continue to live, and you will be able to provide some of that sustenance for us. And Abistanuj had accepted the tobacco, and in our culture, if you give tobacco to somebody, they will give you their GMC if you ask them. No, it's just kidding. So Abistanuj couldn't say no, so he offered his life, and Glooskap took it, snapped his neck, and gave him to grandmother. Grandmother told Glooskap to gather 7 sparks left over from his creation in 10 minutes. So he gathered seven sparks and brought them together in the middle, brought 7 pieces of wood to make a wigwam over the stones, and they called his cousin Whirlwind to come and visit. And Whirlwind swished in, swished back, and caused the sparks to heat up and ignite the wood. And that was the creation of our great spirit fire that we call Akchibukto. And so they've cooked their first meal of meat. A grandmother cooked the meat of the animal on the spirit fire, and then they were able to get their meat, medicine, bones, tools, and the skin and all of that from the animal. And they were able to clothe themselves and so on and so forth. So one day Glooskap decided to walk down to the coastline, to the river, after grandmother taught him everything he needed to know about surviving on Mother Earth. As he was walking along, a young man stood up on this sweet-smelling grass that was growing. The young man was really tall, white sparkling eyes, and was a bit of a giant. And he said, "Who are you? Where do you come from?" And he said, "I am Nedawansam. I come from the ocean. When Whirlwind came, caused the waters to roil up, and foam began to form, and it was blown ashore and rested on this sweet-smelling grass. It gave me life of a young, strong, physically, and I have eyes. I can see far away into the future, and I can see." Glooskap realized that this young person was looking at him, and he realized that now he has to live his life in a certain way, that he doesn't leave something negative to the young person. So you have to leave a legacy of survival to the next generation, because they're looking at us. And so that's one of the lessons that we have in the telling of the story, that young people are running around you. And so you have to live accordingly so that you don't live and impart negative element of your life to that child, because they will become the future leaders, and they will have to know where to collect medicine and food and so on and so forth. So Glooskap had this concept that the young man, there was a reason for him joining the family. And so he called upon the fish of the oceans to offer themselves. And the fish offered themselves, and the young man his nephew brought them to grandmother. They had a feast of fish to honor the young person's arrival to the world. So we talk about eagles, the birds, when Glooskap arrived, grandmother, an animal, and now nephew from the ocean, the water, the fish. And so they had a feast of fish. And I'm cutting this quite short because I don't have many minutes left. So in the creation story, the young person arrives, and they are the strength and backbone of our future nation, 7 generations ahead and even much further. So finally, Glooskap one day was sitting by the fire, and sorry for not looking at you constantly, kind of looking all over the place, imagining how I heard the story from my grandparents and so on. So Glooskap was sitting by the fire, and a woman sat beside him and put her arm around him. And I just hung up Elisa's phone. So Glooskap asked this woman, "Who are you? Where did you come from?" She said, "I am your mother. I owe my existence, my creation, from a leaf on a tree that fell to the ground, and early this morning dew formed on this leaf, and I was given this body of a young woman, very strong and caring, and I bring all the colors of the world." Sorry, persistent color. Somebody worried about Elise, I guess. The mother, she brings colors of the world. She brings strength and love to her children. And so she comes into the world. Glooskap asks the nephew to go and gather food from the plants and trees and roots. And so they gathered this food together, and grandmother prepared a vegetarian feast. So there you have it. I mean, the creation story. Giver of life, number one. Grandfather, number two. Mother Earth, number three. Glooskap was the middle person, because there are 7 elements, 3 before, and then Glooskap, the culture hero, our leader, and then 3 more after him, his nephew, his grandmother first, and then his nephew, and then his mother. So there are 7 elements in the creation story, and the directions are above, giver of life. Grandfather Sun is above, yes, but it shines on our heart, and it gives us a shadow, our spirit. And then Mother Earth, who's below us, who sustains our lives. Then we look to the east for our leadership, Glooskap. We look to the south for our wisdom and knowledge from our elders, our grandmothers. We look to the west, to the young people, because of their vision and their strength. And we look to the north, to our mothers, for their love, for their caring, and their idea of us sharing each other as brothers and sisters. And in the creation story, Glooskap was told to come back to the area where he was born after 7 winters, because 7 families had been born out of that big fire. I'm cutting the story really short here. 7 families were born from the sparks that flew out of the original fire. And one of those sparks ignited and created a woman and a man. And so this woman and man moved out east and arrived here in Mi'kma'ki. And in order not to forget the significance of the 7 levels of creation, we divided our territory into 7 clans, family groups. And we have Unama'ki, which is here, Cape Breton, Eskegia, across the causeway. Ebegwit is Prince Edward Island. Sugubanagari is around close to Shubenacadie. Gespogwit is down in Yarmouth. Sugubanagari is in Elsipogtog area I come from. I'm a hereditary chief and captain on the Mi'kmaq Grand Cup Council representing that territory. And above us is Listaguch. And so the territories, the Mi'kma'ki territories, are into Quebec, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island. We are only close to along the St. John River, where the Wolastoqiyik people occupy from St. John up until Edmundston, and even further up into Canoes, and up north into Quebec in Trois-Rivières, across the river on this side of Trois-Rivières. Anyway, so our region is divided by our clans. And so we go back to the area of the Great Fire, and we reignite the fire. We bring our rocks and we put them in the fire. 28 rocks altogether. We build a shelter, looks like a dome tent, north face dome tent with a door, the door facing the direction of where we light the fire and where the rocks are burning. And 7 representatives of the 7 original families, Mi'kmaq being one, the Innu, the Cree, the Ojibwe, the Algonquians, the Abenaki, Narragansetts, and so on, 7 other nations, Algonquian-speaking nations, were born from this story, this creation story. And so we gathered together, and 7 representatives sit inside of the sweat lodge, and they call upon 7 rocks that represent the first 7 levels of creation. And they close the door, water is poured on the rocks, and steam is made. And this is how we did our first sweat lodge ceremony, with the 7 rocks that represent the grandmother. And so we call upon 7 more rocks to represent the seven original families, Mi'kmaq being one of them, 7 more rocks for the 7 clans of each of the 7 families, and then 7 more rocks for the 7 sacred medicines that we bring into the sweat lodge and divide into 7 equal parts, so that each of the grand chief of the other tribes have a bag full of medicine that is shared from a wide geographic area. And these are supposed to be the strongest medicines that each tribal group has collected and brought and to share with the other tribal groups. So that is the sweat lodge ceremony that represents grandmother. And not to forget the significance of the young man that owed his creation from the sweet smelling grass. We take the hair of Mother Earth, we braid it, we light it on the fire, and we share the smoke to 7 sacred directions with the eagle feather. And we also smudge ourselves. We smudge our mind, our head, our ears, our eyes, our nose, our mouth, and our heart, and the rest of our body and our extremities. And this is what we call a smudging ceremony, a purifying ceremony, a sacred ceremony. And not to forget the significance and the meaning of the mother. She owed her creation from the leaf of a plant. So we take the leaves of a plant and turn it into our tobacco. And so we take also the representative, the rock grandmother, and the mother that comes from the tree. The stem of a pipe, a sacred pipe, is we put the spirit of the grandmother and the spirit of the mother together. And we also take the tobacco, which represents our mother, and we fill the pipe 7 times, offering the tobacco to the 7 sacred directions. And we light the pipe with sweetgrass, and we blow the smoke to the giver of life, to grandfather, son, and ourselves, to Mother Earth, to Glooscap, to grandmother, to the young people, and to our mothers in the north. So the creation story was told to us to explain our Mi'kmaq Grand Council. It also explained relationships that we had with animals, birds, plants, and fish. We always know when to hunt, when to fish, when to collect eggs and birds and so on. We never hunt moose or deer or animals in the middle of the summer unless we have to, if it was for survival. But basically, the meat from those animals during the summer contain lots of germs and mites and diseases. So we usually wait until after the first frost and snowfall, and maybe a couple of weeks afterwards, then we start hunting for animals, birds, plants, fish. Not fish. I mean, I'm trying to speed up the story, and I'm crossing my words across. So in the fall, we start to hunt for moose, caribou, deer, muskrat, rabbits, porcupine, partridge, and so on and so forth. So we were able to survive during the winter months. So in the spring, when the fish start to move, come, and we're always having a natural signals. The fireflies, birds, certain plants flower, the mayflower plant, and so on and so forth. It's time to spear eel. It's time for fishing trout. It's time for shad. It's time for mackerel. It's time for salmon, and so on and so forth. So we have a series of fish that come up the river, and usually we're camped in an area where they come to us. We don't chase after animals or fish. We pretend to be certain representation of a female of an animal or a bull moose, and usually these animals come to us, and we take it because they offer themselves. We dream about them, and we offer ceremony, tobacco and sweetgrass and smoke and songs to them. And so this is our way of negotiating for our survival. And so basically, before Europeans arrived here, we had all the necessary wherewithal, natural laws to govern the way we fished, the way we collected birds, animals, and plants, where we lived, how we engaged in our survival with other people, other tribal groups. We usually knew we didn't have boundaries like today. We didn't have provincial or state or international borders, and natural landscape were basically where we would end. And we know that a certain clan is, their campfire is way up there, and we're not going to go and mess around with them. But on occasion, we tend to gather together to powwow, to smoke pipes and share resources from the land and trade things that we don't have and they don't have. And so that was the nature of society. And after European peoples arrived, our territories started to be reduced. We welcomed everybody because we know our philosophy was we belong to the land, so as everybody else belongs to the land. So we started showing them how to survive on the land, what to eat, what to collect, what grows under the earth, and where is the best fishing places, and so on and so forth. Where are the moose? Where are the caribou? And so that's how we welcomed everybody. I mean, we didn't, we were not territorial people. We didn't say, this is our land. Where's your passport? How much money are you bringing? How long are you going to stay? And where are you going to live? I mean, there was no inkling of that, not even between our cultural tribal groups. There's a written history, historical documents that talk about us fighting the Mohawks and the Mohawks fighting the Hurons and so on and so forth. But you will recall that all of that happened after contact, after European contact, when our technologies began to change from bone and fur and stone into steel and metal knives and axes, cloth, pork, meat, flour, and those other things. And it eventually our people stopped. Well, they were attacking the resources so much. The fur trade kind of almost depleted the moose, the walrus, the beaver, and so on. And finally, our people started to realize we're going to die out pretty soon, just like them, if we don't stop. And so they stopped. But European wars were taking place, and I think I'm going over time. Stop there. So you're all welcome back. I could go on. I usually have 3 hours to tell all that kind of story. It's difficult for me shorten it. I'm cutting out a lot of really important material, but anyway, that's what I offer today. Thank you. Walalio.
Walal and Stephen. So I think what we're planning on doing here, if everybody can hear me, is to have Stephen and Jane up as on video, but Jane turned off her webcam, so she can turn that back on. And we'll just start posing some questions for you to respond to. Stephen, I was laughing the whole time I was watching because that obviously you're not in your own office, you're in Elise's office.
Yes.
Is that correct?
There's a window on this side of me. There are people walking by and cars going by and people waving.
Social distancing while presenting the creation story via technology is evidence that the Mi'kmaq know how to adapt, right?
Oh yes, we've been adapting ever since.
So I always feel bad about rushing through the stories. Actually, I feel like, oh, Alexander, maybe you could turn on my webcam too, because I want Stephen to be able to see my face. Make it more of a conversation. So we always feel it bad. Hi, Stephen. I always feel bad about rushing you through your stories. And as you said, this creation story can often be told over multiple days, and we always limit you to less than what is appropriate. But we are adaptable people at the Mi'kmaq, and so we're really glad that you were able to do that. And I'm sorry it made you flustered and kind of got you off your mark. But you're good humored, right? And the person that was calling.
We negotiate our survival. That's how.
Good point. Okay, so for some context, we have some questions that were posed in advance of organizing this call. So people, as they were registering, were sharing some questions. We also have questions that were coming in specifically about the creation story. So we're gonna start with posing some of those. And Jane can feel free to chime in if she wants to at any point in time as well. She just has to turn her mic and her webcam whenever she wants to do that. And so, Stephen, for some context just about the group, so right now it looks like we have 430 some attendees who are on the call. A lot of them are Nova Scotia civil service people working community culture and heritage and education, interested in issues of diversity and inclusion at work. But there's also small rural organizations, regional organizations in Cape Breton, and the questions that they have are diverse. And so the first question that we have is there any special significance given to the heart organ in your creation story, as opposed to all of the other organs are part of the human body that are mentioned? Does the heart have a special significance?
It's a great philosophical question going all the way back to the Greeks, the time of the Greeks. I mean, it is believed, I mean, in some of the early stuff from Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, that the heart represented the soul. And for me, when I look at grandfather's sun shining and giving me a shadow, and that shadow kind of comes from my grandfather. And the explanation from my grandfather at the time when he was telling me this story, I mean, we were camped out at Kujibukwak, where the Kujibukwak Park is now. I mean, our traditional camp was over there. And we were laying out there on the fire, with the fire in between us. I mean, and he was saying, you know, your shadow comes from Niskamij, grandfather, son. He said, and I am your grandfather, and the story comes from me, and that story is in the blood of my grandfather, he said. And he spoke of Tom Augustine, who related the story to his mother, and it was his mother that taught him the story. And so the heart, he says, represents the spirit, the soul of humanity. So it's the blood that kind of flows through us. And also the blood in our feet are connected to Mother Earth, where all of our ancestors have gone back to Mother Earth, into the ground. And so their blood is like Mother Earth's, her water. I mean, our ancestors' blood is in the water of Mother Earth. And so it flows like through our heart. Gamulami. Gamulami is when I'm breathing, and my heart is called Gamulamun, the breathing apparatus, but it's breathing blood. It's pumping blood in and out while we pump air in and out, and air and blood also mixes and gives us the good gray stuff in our brains to help us think. And yes, the heart is a very important element philosophically among the Greeks and Romans, and today among Indigenous culture, myself, I mean, Mi'kmaq, from what I can derive from the creation story, what I believe anyway. Jane, hello, and
but I agree with you. I think that's a great explanation. I really have nothing to add, but honestly, I could have listened to you for another couple of hours, because what you have to say is so important and interesting. Well, thanks, Steve.
Thank you. And so there's a couple of other questions. This isn't specifically about the creation story, but it is a question that I'd like to hear Jane and Stephen both answer it. It's a question around, you know, like we're listening to these Mi'kmaq stories, and people want to share them and learn from them. But how can you do that? And what is appropriate for people who want to share teachings, might not have access to elders or knowledge holders that they can bring into their classrooms? And do you have any advice about how they can share some of the teachings in respectful and appropriate ways?
First, I'll just go first and say, I think with all the technology that we have today, and if we had better bandwidth here in Cape Breton, I think a lot of the stories and could be said outside by a fire, in a wigwam or teepee, whatever, and in the context where our people have been listening and hearing it. And a lot of it is possible even taking a camera out on the land, out on the river or along the coastline and in the water. I mean, people could follow Clifford or Albert or Ernest or myself. I mean, and tell these stories that the way we heard them from our elders. And I think it's an important element to really go outside and teach outside and tell things outside. That's why I keep looking outside every time. Anyway, yeah, we have the technology, and I think anything is possible nowadays going forward.
Okay. Jane, you're always doing adult education and teaching teachers. I'm sure you get that question a lot as well, as how do we do this in a classroom setting to bring in stories? Do you have any thoughts on that?
It's funny, Stephen was bringing up outdoor education, and that's a piece we did this morning we worked on with the team that I work with through the Department of Ed, and it was a piece on outdoor education and the importance of outdoor education, and how we as Indigenous people are connected to the land. And what happened, the reason it's so important is being out on the land increases creativity, it increases critical thinking, it allows for well-being and for like well-being and less stress, right? It allows us to live in a more peaceful way. It brings inner peace being out there, and I think it's what I do with our teachers is I use a lot of stories and videos too, and I encourage them to use those things, and we have lesson plans through the Department of Ed and through MK, and books that bring a lot of these wonderful teachings. And MK has written books they're called the Unle series, and they're a series of books that talk about, they're setting modern day, they're little animals, but they're setting modern day, it's a modern day setting, but it has our teachings around that. So they're wonderful children's books, and they're beautifully illustrated. And those come from MK, and the Department of Ed has adopted some of those. So.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so as far as the Mi'kmaq creation story, what are the connections? This is a question that came in. What are the connections between Glooscap and historical science? And do you have any thoughts on how to build? It says two-eyed seeing here, but it could be two-eyed seeing or middle ground approaches or whatever is appropriate for science.
Yeah, I think in some sense there is a bit of a disconnect in terms of Glooscap and science, unless we telescope forward and drop in. See, the Glooscap himself, I mean, he was a character. He was our culture hero, and among some cultures, I mean, the Abenaki, Penobscot, when you say the word Glooskabi, it means you're a liar in their language. So early on, the Catholic missionaries kind of taught us to also say manidu, jimanidu. It's like that peeling off process, jimanidu, which is representative of the giver of life for other Algonquian-speaking cultures in like the Ojibwe and the Cree, manidu. But early in our time, manidu became the devil. And so when we were doing our ceremonies, praising the sun and the giver of life, the early priests said we were devil worshippers. And so early on, our people started kind of despising medicine people, shaman, and the traditional medicine spirit keepers. So so there was kind of almost like a disconnect between the stuff that was our foundation of our culture. And when we started being educated into the mainstream context, the first educators were priests and nuns. And then the residential schools, and then the Indian day schools. Indian day schools first in the 1880s here in the Maritimes, and then residential school started in 1928, 29 at Shubenacadie. So our people were kind of and in the communities, the priests were usually riling against traditionalism. And so a lot of our graduates that ended up coming out of residential school, they traveled out west. They explored the Blackfeet, the Cree, Lakota, Dakota, Ojibwe people. And they learned that culture. And they came back and brought that sense of Indianness back to us. So among us, I mean, like Sam Augustine and Noel Knockwood, Noel's brother Henry, they came back kind of espousing the Sundance and the Sweat Lodge and all of those ceremonies. But the elders, they didn't say anything. It was mostly the priests that were objecting to them trying to bring this back to our culture. And I remember several instances at like St. Anne's Day picnics and so on. Some of our elders wanted to bring their traditional costumes into play, and some of the captains on the Grand Council wore their captain outfit, and they put feathers on, but the priests kept telling them, don't put those feathers on. Those are the devil's feathers. And so there was a lot of animosity among our own people, Mi'kmaq people against Mi'kmaq people. The church, Mi'kmaq people, my grandfather and my grandmother and my parents were brought up in the Roman Catholic faith. I mean, I was dragged to church every Sunday. And then later on, as I was growing older, it was Saturday night that you could go to church, 6 o'clock. And then you can go out, party all you want after. So slowly, Catholicism started to ease up on our cultures. And so traditionalism started to gain large foothold among our culture. And so we have this whole ideology of pan-Indianism among us. And it gained its foothold by our people. We allowed it to enter into our communities, and we didn't say anything. We were more or less kind of amazed at the feathers that we saw, and the stoic look of some of the Indians that were dressed up in their traditional outfits. I mean, and then the powwow started coming back. I mean, coming into our community, and we only had the Mawiomi, or the sacred gatherings of the Grand Council on Chapel Island. And so these are the kind of things that kind of resisted the idea of this two-eyed seeing. This is a really new concept, the middle ground approach and two-eyed seeing. So it'll take time for us to rationalize it in our education system. And I think we're slowly heading there with Albert Marshall and Ernest Johnson and myself and Jane Meader and others, Mary Beth, that are bringing these ideologies to the forefront of education for Indigenous people. There's lots of room there to move forward on it.
There is lots of room, and there's lots of learning to do, I think, on my part, for sure. Do you, and Jane or Stephen, either one of you can answer any of these questions. Please, interrupt at any point. But do you see any parallels between the Mi'kmaq creation story and other creation stories in Indigenous nations?
Mary Beth, sorry, I'll wait, Stephen.
Go ahead.
I just want to, can you get back to the question about science and Glooscap? What was the question?
So the question was, what are the connections between Glooscap and historical science? And then it had a note about building two-eyed seeing.
Oh, okay. Well, to me, our creation stories and Glooscap, there's a lot of science in those things. Like when you look at the creation story from the Judeo-Christian faith of Adam and Eve, there's more science in Gloskap, because Gloskap comes from the earth, comes from a bolt of lightning. And science tends to believe that that's where life started, was from a bolt of lightning and from the earth. And then when, like the Gloskap stories, one that always really struck me, and it talks about how long we've been here. One of the Gloskap stories talks about a fight between Winter and Gloskap, and that old man Winter takes over the land. And then Gloskap has to go down south to what is now the United States to bring back summer. And he brings her back. And that, to me, that's the story of the Ice Age. We're talking about the last Ice Age, and our people were witness to that. And even with the Ice Age, Clifford talks about there was an artifact that was found in Debert, and it's a jawbone of a giant beaver. And our people have those stories about the giant animals, the giant megafauna. And they disappeared. They were here before the Ice Age, but yet our people knew those stories. And they had a word when the non-Indigenous people brought the elephant. Our people had a word for it, and it was talking about the skin, but it was the same word that they use for mastodon and for a walrus. And then recently, when they were talking, 20 years ago, scientists did some study in, I think it's on the Bay of Fundy. And the story that our people tell is that it happened 35 years ago. And the story is that a beaver built a dam. And the whale was not happy about it. So the whale came up, and with his tail, he smashed the dam, and it created this Bay of Fundy. Now, 20 years ago, science was looking at that, and they said that, first of all, we were wrong. It happened 5,000 years ago. It was not sudden, and it was, it happened over a long period of time. A few years ago, they decided to revisit that, and then they said, guess what? It happened 3,500 years ago, and it was a catastrophic event that changed that quickly. So to me, the Gloskap stories, there's a lot of science in those stories. And I think we need to look beyond the fact that they are mere myths and legends, because there's a lot of teaching.
They call that the Corona beaver.
There will be stories about the coronavirus, I'm sure, that our descendants will be telling in hundreds and hundreds of years from now. So thank you for clarifying that, Jane. I take your point. So we need to not just dismiss these stories as, like fairy tales, and really question, like what's the meaning behind them? Why are they being told, and what types of things are they trying to teach us, so that we don't forget that the things were different and that we've changed over time. So the other question that I had, we're talking about the Mi'kmaq creation stories, but there are some other people that are just curious about, you've heard many other Indigenous creation stories. Have you seen and heard similarities between that and the Mi'kmaq creation story?
Among the Penobscot, Passamaquoddy people, the Abenaki, I have a theory about the Abenaki tribe that used to live in Maine, and they were dispersed early in the 1600s. They ended up in Quebec during the scuffles between the French and the English. But this Joseph Nicolar, who was Passamaquoddy or Penobscot, and he was a chief of his tribe, and at the time they called him the lieutenant governor of the Penobscot Nation, and he lived on Indian Island near Bangor, and he wrote a book in the 1860s, 70s. It was called The Life and Traditions of the Red Man, and there is a creation story in there that is so very similar to the Mi'kmaq creation story. And if you look it up, The Life and the Traditions of the Red Man by Joseph Nicolar, Nicholar, I think that's how it's spelled. And anyway, it was published in the late 1800s. And I was surprised to see the real similarities between and the significance of the number 7 and the gatherings back in Montreal somewhere among the Mohawks, and there's some kind of a sense of a peaceful relationship had existed before Europeans arrived between the Mohawks and the Eastern tribes. There was never or always any kind of conflict. It was only after the acquisition of metal that our people started to fight over those commodities. One of the things I wanted to mention about the creation story and the way I relate it and the way I explain it is, it is almost like a canon law for Indigenous people. It establishes our relationships and kind of like rule of law. Our rule of law is our children looking at us, and we have to behave like adults, and we have to show that we care for one another. We can look after each other, and we can share all these things. And the whole idea about colonization and decolonization is all of a sudden we were free and roaming and lived our lives and had our own laws and so on and so forth. We ended up living in Indian lands, I mean, in small patches of lands called reserves. And we were charged when we went out off the reserve. I mean, we needed permits to walk around, travel, and so on and so forth. And only now, today, I mean, with this land acknowledgements and the treaties indicating that we never surrendered the land through the treaties, and somehow we need to get back our sense of sovereignty, our sense of having some governance and a relationship with the land and the animals and birds and plants and fish and the water, the air, the earth, the soil. So it's in some sense, decolonization is somehow, for me, making a reality of all of us together, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, learning to survive and learning to share the commodities and elements that come from the Mother Earth, that they're for everybody, not just for a certain population. So I think we need to get back somehow, and this whole coronavirus issue has kind of brought out all of those issues to the forefront, that Indigenous cultures could and may have been really right all along for us to be careful how we extract elements from Mother Earth, how we negotiate our survival. And I think the creation story for me is a semblance of a constitution, that maybe it's a constitution of humanity, that we all have to care for one another as brothers and sisters, like in the creation story. And we have to respect the birds, plants, animals, fish, the air, the water, and the fire.
Well, I agree with Stephen, and I think that the other thing, as far as the creation stories are concerned, when Stephen was talking, one of the things that I think every creation story seems to have is, like he was saying, the creation stories are teaching us how to live on the earth, how to be kind to the earth, how to walk in love, how to be kind to each other, how to to walk in peace on the earth. And I remember an elder once telling me, she said, you know, it doesn't matter which creation story you look at, whether it's Adam and Eve, whether it's the Haudenosaunee creation story, it could be one from South America, it could be one from China, it doesn't matter. If you look at every creation story, the very last thing to be created are human beings. Everything else existed before the human beings were created. And she told me, the reason for that, the teaching behind that is to remind us how the earth can survive without us. If we wipe ourselves off the face of the earth, if we destroy ourselves, the earth will continue. The earth will continue to thrive. On the other hand, if we destroy that life on the earth, we will destroy ourselves completely. We'll wipe ourselves out. They don't need us, but we need them. And I think that should be some humility, that we are not masters of the universe, but rather that we are part and parcel of creation, that we are not above creation, but they are our brothers and sisters. Okay.
I think from my perspective, I've studied a lot of creation stories. When I worked at the Canadian Museum of Civilization, I had to study all the creation stories in North America. And a lot of them are about the environment around where Indigenous people live. It's about the birds and the plants and the animals and the fish that are around them and how they obtain their food and clothing and medicine and shelter. It all comes from those things, those elements. So long time ago, Indigenous people from the East can recognize those Inuit people from the North and those people from the Great Lakes because of the animal skins they were wearing and the feathers and the kind of canoes they were paddling. So the creation story is actually a rationalization of our belonging to that certain particular geographic area of land, an explanation of how we got there and what those elements mean to us, our relationship with them.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add one more thing, and it just none of our creation stories talk about coming across a Bering Strait. None of our origin stories, they all belong here. We start here in North America and Turtle Island.
We already had our Bering Strait.
And on that note, before the jokes start rolling, I have to have the unfortunate position of marking that we're running out of time. And so I just want to, there's so many questions that have been coming in. We can't get to all of them, but there's both questions and lots of comments of gratitude from people saying how grateful they are to have been able to listen, Stephen, to you today, to hear from you and Jane, and to engage in this conversation. And I imagine that next week's call and the following calls, we'll have hopefully a chance to address some of the other questions that have come up. But I want to thank you with so much gratitude for taking the time today to call in from your different spots. And now I'll hand it over to Nicole, who is going to take care of the last few minutes. I think she's going to see us out.
Yes, I too want to extend my deep gratitude to Jane and to Stephen and to you, Mary Beth. It's been an incredible session, and I think we're all agreed, particularly with the comments of gratitude, that this has just been such a tremendous session and people are yearning for more. So deep appreciation. Jane and Stephen, thank you particularly in your closing remarks, or as we're winding up these questions, of the reminder to be kind to each other, to walk in peace, and to be kind to the earth. There's so much happening right now in the world, in the US, across Canada, that a lot of hearts are breaking. And so that reminder, especially as we're moving out of our session today, to go with a tender heart and to take care of each other and to take care of our earth is just so profound. So thank you for that. I also want to just say thank you to Elise McLean, Unama'ki College, and to Stephen with Unama'ki College to help make this journey possible. And lastly, please join us for the next 3 sessions in this month alone, and we'll start back up again in the fall. And a real reminder to try to join with your staff team and your board so that we can really start to make some systemic change and build our networks across Nova Scotia and beyond these borders. And when this session comes to a close, by the time you close and check your inbox, your email, you will see a survey. And so we invite all participants to please complete the survey. It gives us really valuable feedback. This is a new journey for us. So we're looking for ways to improve and to respond to what it is that you're looking for. So thank you. And Mary Beth, I want to pass it back to you, to Stephen and Jane for final thoughts and comments before Jane takes us right out with the closing.
My final thoughts, I will not take any more time because I will be involved in this conversation for weeks to come. So I will leave it to our other guests. And Stephen's coming back in 2 weeks' time, so we're not seeing the end of him either.
I will continue where I left off, I guess. In terms of highlighting contact and arrival of European peoples into Mi'kma'ki in Canada and even United States. Yes, I think it's an important element. I mean, all the sections of the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, I mean, are addressing everything that everybody's involved in today in this conversation. And I'm very happy that people got an opportunity to listen to the message about how Indigenous people are trying to recover our culture and our traditions and our language, because there was a point in time that we almost lost it all. And even in the middle of the 1800s, there was only 1,500 Mi'kmaq people left in Nova Scotia. So we were almost on the brink of extinction. We saw the walrus in Prince Edward Island. There was a protection regulation, colonial law to protect the walrus, and despite that, they still disappeared from Prince Edward Island. And in the Canso region, our people used to go there to hunt walrus in order to get skins as thick as elephants to use as our soles for most of our moccasins. Anyway, so I think that the delicate nature of Mother Earth and peoples on it, our relatives, the Beotics in Newfoundland disappeared after 1830s, 1829, when they say the last one died, but other Mi'kmaq will say, well, I'm part Beothuk. So anyway, it's the delicate nature of our culture and our society today, and we need to soften up, like Jane said to us. We have to soften our walk on Mother Earth. Walalio.
I don't know what to say after that, Stephen. But I think this was an amazing session. I really enjoyed it. And, you know what, I think too, we have to not just soften our walk, but we need to soften We need to learn to love again. We really do. Look at what's happening in the United States and in parts of Canada with Black Lives Matter. We need to make them matter. And it's each of us as individuals. It's not and if each of us as individuals learn to love and to care for each other, to for the earth, I think we would live in a utopia. It's up to each and every one of us. We can't say the problems are so big I can't do anything. If we each take the time to love and to care and to stop walking in fear, but rather walk in love, we will create a much better earth for all the children that are coming, for all the future generations. And I want to thank each and every one of you from the bottom of my heart for these sessions and to send my love to each and every one of you. Miigwech, Walalio, and Yawa.
Malaliak.
Lalan, Malaliak. Thank you.
Thank you. See you next week.
You push first.